Is this some kind of joke? The cadet's voice, sharp and laced with the unearned confidence of youth, cut through the low whine of a distant jet engine. He stood with his chest puffed out, a human barricade before the cavernous opening of Hangar 4. Before him, Arthur Griffin remained perfectly still. At 85 years old, his frame was leaner than it once was, his face a roadmap of a life lived long and hard, yet his back was straight, his eyes clear and calm, fixed not on the hostile young man but on some point far beyond, in the sun-bleached distance of the airfield. He wore a simple windbreaker and slacks, looking more like a grandfather who had taken a wrong turn on his way to the grocery store than a guest at a secure military installation. "I'm just here to see an old friend," Arthur said, his voice a low, gravelly hum that was nearly swallowed by the vastness of the concrete apron. The cadet, whose name tag read Miller, exchanged an exasperated look with the airman next to him. "Sir, this isn't a retirement home. This is an active United States Air Force base. For the last time, I need you to turn around and leave the premises. Now." His hand drifted down, coming to rest near the holstered sidearm on his belt, a gesture of practiced intimidation. It had no effect. Arthur seemed not to notice, his gaze unwavering, his hands resting calmly at his sides. He had been standing here for 10 minutes, a silent, unmovable object meeting the force of adolescent authority. The confrontation had started simply enough, with a polite but firm, "Halt, sir. May I see your credentials?" But as Arthur patiently explained, he had none. That he was an invited guest of the wing commander himself, the cadet's professional demeanor had curdled into outright contempt. The wing commander. Miller had scoffed, a smirk twisting his lips. "Right, and I'm the chief of staff. I've heard that one before." Now a small crowd was beginning to form. A few mechanics in greasy coveralls paused on their way to the flight line. Their curiosity piqued. A pair of administrative clerks slowed their walk, whispering to each other. The scene was becoming a public spectacle, a quiet drama playing out under the harsh afternoon sun. The air was thick with the smell of jet fuel and hot asphalt, a scent that was as familiar and comforting to Arthur as the smell of baking bread. To Cadet Miller it was the smell of his domain, a place he was sworn to protect from doddering old men with fanciful stories. He escalated, his voice rising in volume. "Look, Grandpa, I don't have time for your games. Are you lost? Did you wander off from the base museum? This is a restricted area. The next words out of your mouth had better be 'yes, sir' as you turn around and walk away." Arthur finally shifted his gaze, his calm blue eyes landing on the cadet. There was no anger in them, only a profound and weary patience. "Son, I assure you, I am exactly where I'm supposed to be." He reached into his windbreaker. "I don't have a badge, but perhaps this will help." "Let me guess," Miller sneered. "A VFW membership card, a library card. That's not getting you in." Arthur's hand emerged with a wallet. It was made of dark brown leather, so old and worn that the corners were soft and rounded, the surface cracked like dry earth. He didn't offer it to the cadet. Instead, he opened it, and his thumb gently slid over a faded cellophane-protected photograph tucked into one of the sleeves. For the briefest of moments, the world shifted for Arthur. The harsh glare of the sun became the dappled light of an English morning. The whine of the modern jet became the throaty, soul-shaking roar of a Merlin engine firing to life. He was 21 again, his face smudged with oil and grinning with a wild joy that only pilots know, standing on the wing of his P-51 Mustang. On its nose, painted in elegant flowing script, was the name Serafina. He could feel the newness of the wallet in his breast pocket, a gift tucked there for luck. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, a ghost of memory against the cold reality of the moment. He was back on the concrete, an old man being berated by a child in a uniform. The commotion had attracted the attention of Miller's superior, a young staff sergeant who jogged over, his expression a mixture of annoyance and concern. "What's the holdup here, Miller?" "This gentleman refuses to comply with security protocols, Sergeant," Miller reported, his voice filled with self-importance. "He has no credentials and claims he was invited by the wing commander." The sergeant, a man named Henderson, turned to Arthur. His approach was more professional, but the core of the problem remained. "Sir, I'm sorry, but Cadet Miller is correct. Without the proper credentials or a registered escort, I can't let you pass this point. It's a matter of base security." "I understand you have a job to do, Sergeant," Arthur said, his voice even. "And your cadet is certainly zealous. But if you could just make a call to Colonel Davis's office, this could all be sorted out." Henderson sighed. "Sir, with all due respect, we can't just make a call for everyone who shows up claiming to know the CO. It would be a logistical nightmare. Now please, we're holding up traffic." The crowd of onlookers had grown. Some shook their heads in sympathy for the old man. Others murmured their agreement with the security personnel. The tension was a palpable thing, shimmering in the heat rising from the tarmac. Watching from a distance, leaning against the hangar wall with a cup of coffee, was Chief Master Sergeant Barnes. A 30-year veteran, Barnes had a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the sun. He had seen everything the Air Force had to offer, from blistering deserts to frozen tarmacs, and he had an almost supernatural sense for when things were about to go sideways. At first he dismissed the scene as a routine security stop. But the longer he watched, the more something felt wrong. It was the old man. His posture wasn't just straight, it was the ingrained ramrod stillness of a career officer. His calm wasn't the confusion of an old man, it was the unnerving placidity of a man who had faced down far worse things than an arrogant cadet. He heard the old man say his name again, clearly and patiently, to Sergeant Henderson. "My name is Arthur Griffin. Colonel Davis is expecting me. We have an appointment with a very old friend." The name Griffin lodged in the chief's mind. It wasn't just a name, he'd heard it recently. Where? A briefing, a history presentation at the Senior NCO Academy. Then it hit him. Colonel Davis himself had mentioned it just last week in a command meeting. A special guest, a living legend. Chief Barnes looked closer, really looked at the old man's face, the set of his jaw, the quiet authority that radiated from him like heat. The pieces clicked into place with a terrifying certainty. He knew, with the kind of gut instinct that had kept him and his airmen alive for 3 decades, that Sergeant Henderson and Cadet Miller were standing on the lip of a volcano, cheerfully poking it with a stick. Barnes didn't shout. He didn't run over and pull rank. That would be messy and undermine the chain of command. Instead, he turned, melting away from the wall. He pulled out his personal cell phone and speed-dialed a number he knew by heart, the direct line to the wing commander's executive aide. "Captain Rivera, it's Chief Barnes," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Sorry to bother you, but there's a developing situation down at Hangar 4's checkpoint." "Yes, ma'am." "There's an elderly gentleman being detained by security. He says his name is Arthur Griffin." He paused, listening. "Yes, ma'am. Griffin. I thought the colonel would want to know." Immediately, he hung up. The dominoes had been pushed. Help, or perhaps divine retribution, was on the way. The phone call reached the wing commander's command suite on the second ring. Colonel Davis was in the middle of a tense logistics briefing, surrounded by his senior staff. His aide, Captain Rivera, took the call, her face a mask of professional courtesy. As Chief Barnes spoke on the other end, the captain's posture straightened, and the color drained from her face. She held the phone to her chest, stood, and took a deep breath. "Sir," she said, her voice cutting through the talk of fuel requisitions. "Colonel Davis, I apologize for the interruption." Davis looked up, his brow furrowed in annoyance. "What is it, Captain? This is important." "Sir, Chief Master Sergeant Barnes is on the line from Hangar 4, she said, swallowing hard. "There's a situation. There's an elderly civilian. And—" Davis snapped, his patience wearing thin. "Sir," Captain Rivera's voice was now barely a whisper. "He says his name is Arthur Griffin." The name hung in the air-conditioned room like a thunderclap. Colonel Davis froze. The pen in his hand slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the polished mahogany table. The other officers stared, first at the captain, then at their commander, whose face was a rapid-fire slideshow of emotions, confusion, then dawning comprehension, then sheer unadulterated horror. "Griffin?" Davis breathed, his voice hoarse. "Arthur Griffin? Not the Griff?" Captain Rivera nodded, her eyes wide with shared panic. In an instant, Colonel Davis was transformed. He shot to his feet with such force that his heavy chair screeched backward and nearly toppled over. The weary bureaucrat was gone, replaced by a commander on the verge of battle. "Get my vehicle," he roared, pointing a trembling finger at the captain. "Now, tell every officer in this room to meet me at Hangar 4 on the double, full honors detail. Move, people, move." The placid command suite erupted into a frenzy of controlled chaos. Officers grabbing hats and scrambling for the door with a sense of emergency usually reserved for an inbound missile. The audience in the room understood, and now the audience watching this story understood. They knew the secret that Cadet Miller, in his moment of peak arrogance, was about to discover in the worst way possible. Back at the hangar, blissful ignorance had given way to aggressive overreach. Cadet Miller, feeling the eyes of the crowd on him and misinterpreting the veteran's silence as stubborn defiance, decided to end the standoff. Sergeant Henderson was trying to de-escalate, suggesting they just call the visitor center and wait, but Miller was high on his own authority. "That's it. I'm done playing games," Miller announced, taking a deliberate step toward Arthur. He unsnapped the retaining strap on his holster. "Sir, you are creating a security disturbance on a federal installation. You have 2 choices. You can turn around and leave immediately, or I will be forced to place you in restraints and detain you for trespassing." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial sneer. "We can sort this all out downtown. Maybe a nice long chat and a psych evaluation are in order." The threat hung in the air, ugly and final. To question a man's freedom was one thing. To question his sanity was a profound and unforgivable insult. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Sergeant Henderson looked mortified. This was a catastrophic failure of professionalism, and it was happening on his watch. Arthur Griffin simply looked at the boy. For the first time, a flicker of emotion showed in his eyes. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't anger. It was a deep, soul-crushing disappointment. Before Miller could make good on his threat, a new sound tore through the air. It wasn't the familiar roar of a jet, but the high-pitched squeal of tires on pavement. A black command vehicle, the official car of the wing commander, skidded to a halt just yards away, its siren giving a final dying yelp. It was followed immediately by two more SUVs which braked hard behind it. The doors of the lead vehicle flew open and Colonel Davis practically leaped out, his face a mask of cold fury. He was followed by a torrent of scrambled brass. Lieutenant colonels, majors, and the base command chief all tumbling out of the vehicles and striding forward with a singular, terrifying purpose. The effect was instantaneous. The murmuring crowd fell silent. Every airman, mechanic, and clerk snapped to attention, their eyes wide with a mixture of shock and terror. The entire wing leadership had just descended upon Hangar 4 like a thunderbolt from a clear blue sky. The air crackled with a new potent authority that made Cadet Miller's posturing look like a child's game. Colonel Davis didn't spare a single glance for Miller or Henderson. His eyes, burning with an intense fire, were locked on one man. He strode forward, his polished black shoes eating up the distance on the concrete. As he closed the last few feet to Arthur Griffin, his furious expression melted away, replaced by one of profound, almost reverent respect. 3 feet away, he stopped. He drew himself up to his full height, his back as straight as a rifle barrel. Then he executed the sharpest, most impeccable salute of his entire career. "Colonel Griffin, sir," his voice boomed across the silent tarmac, cracking with emotion. "On behalf of the entire 41st Wing, I am so sorry. It is an honor, sir. Welcome home." Behind him, the entire line of senior officers snapped to attention and saluted in perfect synchronized unison. The world stopped for Cadet Miller. His jaw hung open, his face bleached of all color. He felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the ground had dropped out from beneath him. Beside him, Sergeant Henderson looked as if he might be physically ill. Colonel Davis held his salute, his eyes still fixed on Arthur. He raised his voice, ensuring everyone in the assembled crowd could hear every single word. "For those of you who don't know," he began, his gaze sweeping over the onlookers before landing like a physical weight on Cadet Miller, "you are standing in the presence of a giant. This is Colonel Arthur Griffin." He took a breath, his voice ringing with pride and fury. This man flew 78 combat missions over Europe in a P-51 Mustang he called Serafina. He was shot down, twice, and he evaded capture and walked back to Allied lines. Both times, he went on to fly F-86 Sabres in Korea, where he became one of our nation's first jet aces. He flew reconnaissance over hostile territory in the U-2. When he finally stopped flying combat, he became a test pilot. He flew the prototypes for the F-4 Phantom and the F-15 Eagle. The revolutionary flight control systems that keep the F-16S in this very hangar from falling out of the sky are based on aerodynamic principles he personally risked his life to prove at Edwards Air Force Base. Davis paused, his voice thick with emotion. This man didn't just fly for the Air Force. He didn't just serve his country. This man is one of the architects of modern air power. He built what we are today. A wave of stunned awe washed over the crowd. People slowly lowered the phones they had raised, suddenly ashamed to be recording, as if they were standing on holy ground. Whispers spread like fire in dry grass. "That's him? The Griff? The legend from the history books?" The mechanics who worked on the jets he helped design stared in disbelief. The young pilots who studied his tactics at the academy looked at him with a newfound, profound reverence. Chief Master Sergeant Barnes, still standing off to the side, allowed himself a small, grimly satisfied smile and gave a slow, respectful nod. Arthur finally returned the salute with a tired, gentle motion, and Colonel Davis dropped his arm. He then turned, and the full force of his fury was directed at the two petrified security airmen. His voice dropped to a low, dangerous growl that was more terrifying than any shout. "Sergeant Henderson, Cadet Miller, my office, 1600 hours. You will be in your dress blues." He then pointed a trembling finger directly at Miller. "And you, young man, are on latrine and barracks duty until further notice. Your first special assignment is to write a 5,000-word essay by hand on the contributions of Colonel Arthur Griffin to the United States Air Force. You embarrassed yourself today. You embarrassed my security forces, and you embarrassed this entire wing. But worst of all, his voice broke with anger. You disrespected a man to whom every single one of us owes an immeasurable debt of gratitude. The public rebuke was brutal, surgical, and absolute. As Miller stood swaying on his feet, Arthur Griffin stepped forward. He placed a gentle, steadying hand on Colonel Davis's arm. "Easy there, Colonel," Arthur said softly, his voice carrying in the silence. The young man was doing his job, a little overzealously perhaps. But his orders were to secure the post, and he was following them. He turned his attention to Miller, who could not bring himself to meet the old man's gaze. "Son," Arthur said, and the word held no condescension, only a quiet wisdom. "A uniform doesn't earn you respect. Your actions do, and respect isn't something you can demand from people. It's something you ought to give, freely and generously, especially to those who have come before you. You never know what battles they've already fought." The words weren't an attack. They were a lesson, delivered with a grace that made the preceding tirade seem crude by comparison. It was the simple truth, and it cut deeper than any punishment. Colonel Davis, his anger beginning to subside, noticed the worn leather wallet still clutched in Arthur's hand. "Sir," he asked, his voice softer now, "is that the one?" Arthur looked down at the wallet, a faint smile touching his lips. "It is," and for a final time, the past echoed forward. We see a rainy airfield, decades ago. A beautiful young woman with kind, worried eyes presses a brand new wallet into the hand of a young, uniformed Arthur. "So you don't forget your way back to me," she says, her voice thick with love and fear. He tucks it into the breast pocket of his flight jacket, placing it over his heart. "Never, Serafina," he promises. Back in the present, Arthur looks from the wallet to Colonel Davis. A promise is a promise. Colonel Davis personally escorted Arthur Griffin past the rows of saluting airmen and into the cool, cavernous space of Hangar 4. There, gleaming under the massive lights, sat a brand-new F-35 Lightning II, and on its nose, painted in the same elegant script as its long-gone ancestor, was the name Serafina. It was a surprise tribute, arranged by Davis for the base's anniversary and the reason for Arthur's visit, to reunite him in a way with his old friend. The story of the confrontation at the gate spread across the base, then across the Air Force, like a shockwave. It became an instant legend, a cautionary tale. Colonel Davis, true to his word, mandated a new training module for all security personnel titled Veteran Interaction and Professional Courtesy. The security footage of the incident, with faces and names redacted, became the primary training aid on what not to do. A formal written letter of apology was couriered from the wing command to Colonel Griffin's home. He accepted it with his usual grace, asking only that the young men involved be taught, not just punished. A week later, a humbled man named Miller was mopping the floor of the base exchange. His dream of being a pilot was gone, washed out of the program. But he had been allowed to remain in the Air Force as an airman basic, starting from the very bottom. He saw Arthur sitting alone at a small table in the food court, nursing a cup of coffee. His heart hammered against his ribs. Taking a deep, shaky breath, he propped his mop against a wall and walked over. "Sir," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Arthur looked up. "Sir, my name is Miller. I was the cadet at the gate." He could feel his face burning with shame. I wanted to apologize, properly. There's no excuse for my conduct, for how I spoke to you. I was arrogant, and I was wrong. I'm sorry." Arthur Griffin looked at the young man for a long moment, then gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit down, son." Miller sat. They talked for nearly an hour. Arthur didn't lecture or chastise him. He asked about Miller's family, where he was from, what he had hoped to achieve. He told a few self-deprecating stories about the boneheaded mistakes he'd made as a young second lieutenant. He offered not condemnation but something Miller desperately needed and didn't deserve: mentorship. When Miller finally stood to leave, he felt like a different person. He had been humbled by discipline, but he had been changed by grace. The story of Arthur Griffin is a powerful reminder that heroes walk among us every day, often in the quietest, most unassuming forms. If you were moved by his story of valor and grace, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to Veteran Valor for more incredible stories of those who served.